Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our 8th episode of our OperaLIVE interview series. My name is Cody Martin. I'm the Director of Education here at Pensacola Opera, and we have another great interview and a look behind the scenes today in the opera world. But first, I'd like to talk about just a couple of things we have coming up here at Pensacola Opera. First off, we have our at-home opera camp, which is coming up at the end of June. This is for ages 6 to 14. So any of our future opera lovers, future opera stars who want to get involved and learn a little bit about music and theater from the comfort of your home. Registration is open right now, and for just $50, you get a full kit of supplies, everything you need to create this theater magic. You'll get props, a makeup kit, a t-shirt, a CD, everything you need, and a full activity guide to guide you through a week of at-home opera activities. The at-home dates are going to be June 22nd through the 26th, and registration is open right now through May 31st. I'll put a link to information about that opera camp in the chat below. And also this week, on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Central, we will be premiering a special performance with soprano Alonda Small-Campbell. It's going to be a nice 20-minute program with art songs, spiritual arias, the whole shebang. So I hope you will consider tuning in for that on Thursday evening or sometime after that. And now to introduce our guest for today, Brian August is a stage manager. He's worked at Des Moines Metro Opera, Houston Grand Opera, and Atlanta Opera. And he is joining us today from Houston. So let me get him pulled on. There we go. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Cody. Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. Hanging in there. We're all hanging in there, right?
Exactly.
So start us off with maybe just a 60-second, 90-second little bio of where you're from, where you went to school, all of those sorts of things.
Sure. So I grew up in a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, about 25 minutes outside of Detroit. And I went to school at Boston University for stage management specifically. And then I had a bit of a freelance career for a while, which I'm sure we could talk about. And then I settled down in Atlanta for a while. And then just recently, this past season, joined the stage management staff at the Houston Grand Opera.
Great. Okay, so you went to school for stage management, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, about what stage management is. But how did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
Sure. So going to high school in Michigan, I was involved backstage in the theater. My very freshman year, I worked on the scenic building crew, which is not something I would do now, and the run crew for our high school's musical of West Side Story. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I really liked seeing what the stage manager did. And I was like, oh, that looks kind of fun. Like, I'll ask to do that, to be an assistant stage manager, next year. So I started ASMing. And the end of my sophomore year, I called my first show. So I was the head stage manager for that show. And then looking at, in the future, what did I want to do? Starting to think about colleges, things like that. I was I succeeded a lot in English and also in the stage management. And trying to decide what I should do, I decided to pursue stage management. I didn't really know what to do with an English degree. And now I don't know if I were to stop stage managing what I would do with a stage management degree. But so far, that's not been a problem for me at all, which is great. So I went to school at Boston University, and I have a BFA in stage management, and I graduated in 2010.
Fantastic. Okay, so now we get to tell everybody what stage management is. If somebody's never heard that term before, which I'm sure a lot of people haven't, how would you describe it succinctly and just for a layperson to understand what it is?
Sure. There are so many different ways you could try to describe it. When I first decided to go to school for stage management, my father thought I wanted to be on the crew at first. He didn't quite understand exactly either. So it's a very nuanced profession. There's a lot of detail that goes into it. Sometimes you do a new production, which means the set is new, the costumes are new, the staging the directors come up with is all new. And then sometimes in opera, we do a remount, which is where the production's been done elsewhere, and a company is either a co-producer and sharing the costs, or they're renting in the set and the costumes. The singers don't always travel with, the crew does not travel with, and the stage management usually doesn't travel with either. So just the way we approach a show is a little bit different, but we kind of do the same things. So if it's a remount of a show, I'll start by watching the archival video and just kind of learning what the show looks like and seeing what it looks like. I'll study the costumes. I'll study, all the scenery and the ground plans. If it's a new production, you're not looking at photos, you're looking at renderings and designs and sketches. Not everyone knows this, but we don't really rehearse with the set until the final moments before we open a show. So we rehearse in a rehearsal room, and it's the stage management's job to tape out a floor. So a big part of our job is communication. And one way, of nonverbal communication is actually through the tape on the floor. So I look at the ground plans, I use my scale rule and I measure out, and then we put brightly colored pieces of tape representing different set pieces on the floor. So if you're doing something like Marriage of Figaro, you might do one act in one color, another act in another color. Doing something like Aida, most recently at Houston Grand Opera, we had a lot of colors on the floor. And I try to theme them around, the set and things like that to give people in the room an idea of what's happening. The opening scene of Aida had this big blue pyramid, so I did blue tape for the opening scene. So you don't look at any other tape other than that blue tape for that scene.
But at the most basic level, a stage manager is the person who kind of maybe runs the rehearsal. Would you say that, as a person who is the point person for everybody? Yeah.
Yeah, we're really involved in the communication, as I said. So again, knowing a little bit of all parts of the show, and then once we get past our prep period and we get into the rehearsals, we're helping out with the director and the assistant director. We have usually 2 assistants, sometimes 3 assistant stage managers in the room who have entirely different jobs than I do. And we really do function as a team. We're taking notes on if something has changed in a production. If a director says, "Oh, I want to add a pair of eyeglasses," well, okay, then I have to tell the costume shop that this character needs eyeglasses now, and in what scene. If we're no longer going to be doing a toast with champagne, I'll tell the props department, "Oh, you can cut the glasses and cut the champagne," so they're not wasting money and time on that as well. So calling any union breaks we need to, if you work at a union company, and just kind of taking care of all people's needs that we need to. That's a big part of us.
Yeah. So during rehearsals, the stage manager is the point of contact, the communication. They usually at least have a hand in making the schedule for the day, and distributing that, of course. Then once we move into the theater, how does the job shift then? What's your focus in the theater?
Sure. So since we also don't rehearse in the room usually with any crew, stage management's job is to generate all the paperwork. That's a big part of our job. As I mentioned, we usually have 2 assistant stage managers, sometimes 3. One of them usually tracks any wardrobe and hair and makeup changes. One of them usually does props. And then it's usually the stage manager's job to do any scenery. So anything that flies, anything that moves on or off, things like that. So we create all this paperwork based on our time in the rehearsal room. So when we get to the stage, because our stage time is very, very short, we can just give the crew these pieces of paperwork to run the show.
Yes, exactly. So you mentioned earlier, you said the word calling. Yeah. What does that mean when you're calling a show?
Right. So it is the job of the stage manager to, as you just said, call the show. That means that we give warnings on standbys and the actual cues for basically anything that you see happen on stage. So if you see a light change, I'm not the one designing the lights, but I'm the one telling someone when to execute and hit the button. I'm not the one pulling the ropes to fly something. That's, the crew person's job, but I'm giving the standby, of what they're doing, what speed they're doing it at, and then actually saying go and timing it out so the show actually, runs flawlessly, hopefully. I have a little prop here for you. It's just a picture of my Aida score. So this was the very opening page of Aida at Houston Grand Opera this year. I have a cue here. I have a standby here of a description of what we're doing. another cue on the next page. Top of the next page, I have a light cue. So I use different colors to represent different things. I do pink as scenery, green as lighting. Every stage manager has their own system though for that.
So you have all of these different cues and it comes together all at the same time. I have a little video. This is from your production that you did in Atlanta of Turandot by Puccini. And so tell us what's going on here. This is the very opening of the show. Tell us what we're going to see. What are you doing in this scene?
It is. So I think in the very, very beginning of the video, you actually see me calling for the house lights to go down and for the conductor to enter. So that's all timed out with, on my cue. I'm communicating with the front of the house staff to make sure that we are actually able to start on time, that we don't have, a backup at the valet or something. We don't want to have any very important people be late for the performance. So once we're ready to go, I then, cue the conductor in, they start the tuning process, and then you'll actually, see the curtain go out. You'll see me call for that, and you'll see some lighting cues, some spot cues, and some other fun cues in that video.
Yeah. All right. So let's look at this, the beginning of Turandot from Atlanta. Let me get this pulled up.
Go. Lights 8 and Maestro 7 up. Go. Lights 9 and Maestro 7 down. Go. We have Q2. Go. Lights 1.
So that's a good little clip. So explain to us, now that you've seen the video fresh, are there any special things you want to point out there?
Sure. There's something that's a little bit out of frame, but it's called cue lights. And that is another fail-safe way if an operator on the crew does not have a headset, that I turn a switch on or off. The on is their standby, and then when I turn it off, it's their cue to go. So I also give them that in their standby as well. I'm pointing at the screen a bit. That was done originally for the camera for the Atlanta Opera's video, showing where someone was crossing through, and I would call a spot cue when they basically cross through my finger. So all of those things are controlled by the stage manager's words. And
you tell us about the monitors.
Yes. So I typically in opera, you don't get to call from the front of the house. I'm not seeing what the audience is seeing the same way. I usually have 3 video screens. One of them is the conductor screen. In opera, it's very, very important. The music is obviously the most important thing. And we often have cues on very specific beats. So I have to be able to see the conductor just like the singers. Then I have my stage shot in color, which is what I usually use to call the show. And then we often have an infrared camera as well, which allows us to see in the dark. Sometimes it's very dim lighting and you can't see it on the color monitor. Sometimes you have to, when someone gets to a certain point on stage in a blackout, then you turn the lights on. That allows me to see all those hidden things to make it even more special for the audience. There's other monitors involved as well, but those aren't as exciting. So
yeah, and even though you're not seeing it from the house, you are, usually within 15 feet of the stage. So you really have an up close view of the action. How does that feel, being kind of on stage but not on stage at the same time?
I love it. A lot of theater stage managers and opera stage managers call from the back of the auditorium, and I find that very, very difficult. I find that you're very disconnected from the performance itself. I love being able to hear things and see things right there. being so far away, sometimes it's hard to see if, a very intimate moment needs to happen. I can just turn and just see it happen right there, and not even rely on my monitor itself. If it's that close, which is great.
Yeah. We have one question from Mary who says, obviously you do read music. Was that part of your training as a stage manager?
It was not, Mary. I grew up playing instruments. I started playing the xylophone when I was, in first grade, I think. And then moved into the recorder, and then finally the oboe, which I played the oboe for 5 years. And then I did not use music for a while. My junior and senior year in high school, I called shows out of a combination score and libretto for the musicals, and then brushed up on my skills more and more as I started doing opera. I've now stage managed or assistant stage managed over probably 80, 85 operas at this point now. So yes, music is now a huge part of my day.
It's kind of essential in opera, I think, to be able to at least follow music. Even if you can't read every note, you have to be able to at least see the visualization of what music looks like. Otherwise, you would be lost, right?
Exactly. Some stage managers obviously don't have quite the training or quite the capability, but at a certain point that can be a bit limiting in opera. Some operas are very, very challenging. This summer, I did this past production of Wozzeck at Des Moines Metro Opera, and that's some of the hardest music that I've ever seen. And I think that most people have ever seen. And there's absolutely no way that I could have faked that without some really good music reading skills.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite productions or fun stories or any mishaps? I mean, because as a stage manager, it's your responsibility to respond to any mishaps that happen. So do you have any particular stories you'd like to share?
It is. So I think one of my favorite productions was actually that production of Wozzeck. That was just about a year ago at Des Moines Metro Opera. And I have never been that busy calling a show. The show itself was 93 minutes, front to back, no intermission. And I did not stop talking for 93 minutes. I've never had more cues in a show in my entire life. We had lots of flying elements and moving elements, and we had trapdoors and a hydraulic elevator involved in the set. It was very, very busy. Unfortunately, one night, I think it was our third performance, in one of the scene changes, this giant wall flies in, and then we bring in a platform behind the wall. And this wall has little barn doors that open up in it. So then the next thing was that they would open up to reveal this performer on a platform. And in the scene change, the crew had moved this platform in and knocked the doors, which meant that they were off of their tracks. So when I, gave the standby and then the go, the operator was pulling on the lines to open the doors, and they weren't going. So I called for it a second time, thinking she might have missed the cue the first time. Then I realized they were not opening. So I called for the head of the stage, the head carpenter. Her name is Alex, to come over. And we only had about 10 seconds, maybe a little less, until that performer needed to start singing. So at that point, I'm running through all these different scenarios in my head in about 10 seconds. I quickly pull out my emergency announcements because while I can, do it right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a technical difficulty. At this time, we must pause this performance of Wozzeck. Please remain in your seats, and the show will resume as soon as possible. Thank you. I can, make that up on the fly right now, but in the heat of the moment, stopping a show and making a live announcement to an audience, you don't want to be improvising that. So while Alex is quickly trying to fix the set, I'm getting my announcement out just in case I have to start reading it, and I get the microphone turned on. And I decided I was going to let the first line be sung from behind the wall. While it wouldn't look the best necessarily, it wouldn't stop the show, and I was going to try to give them that chance. Unfortunately, after that first line was sung and she finished it, I had to pull that trigger and stop the show. So I made my announcement. Obviously, the conductor knew basically to stop as well as soon as he heard my voice because there was not a singer singing on stage. So he cut off the orchestra, and I read my announcement and then turned my microphone off and asked for an update from the crew. As soon as they were competent, we resumed the show. So I had already sent one of my assistant stage managers down to the orchestra pit to tell the conductor where we needed to restart from. Luckily, there was a great spot musically. It happened the stopping the show actually happened at a great spot. As soon as we were ready, I had asked the house lights to go back out because I had asked them, to go to a glow so the audience could talk a little bit if they needed to. And then I had the house lights come back out, which kind of signals to the audience, oh, we're ready to start again, just like at the top of a show. And then the orchestra started playing, and then we did the rest of the show. Thankfully, it didn't seem to take anyone out of the show or really ruin the moment. So,
good. Yeah, and so the stage manager has to be really level-headed during these moments, because I'm sure if you start freaking out, everybody else will start freaking out a little bit.
Sure.
Awesome. Any other stories or any favorite productions maybe that you've been a part of that you really, really just enjoyed?
Yeah. There's an opera, Dead Man Walking, which I've gotten to do twice now in my career, which is a little bit strange for, a contemporary opera that a stage manager's gotten to do it more than once. I got to do it at Des Moines Metro Opera in 2014. And then I also got to do it at the Atlanta Opera in 2019. They were entirely different productions by different directors and different casts. But approaching the show a second time was very interesting because I already knew all the music. I knew all those things. Both productions themselves were very, very complicated. And I like that. I think it's really fun when I'm very busy, figuring out all the puzzle pieces of how things need to move and working on that. I love getting to call shows that are really, really busy. There's some beautiful, beautiful shows out there, but sometimes they're not very involved for a stage manager, and my mind tends to wander. So I try to, always stay very, very focused and engaged on a show. Otherwise, I don't want to miss a cue. That'd be Lisa Hassan, I believe, is in the chat and watching right now. We worked on a production of Turandot together at the Atlanta Opera as well. And there was a moment where during the show, I looked over and Lisa was out in the house. It was a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal. And the person who was supposed to be conducting the children's chorus was nowhere to be found. So the kids are just looking at me because they actually sang off stage where I was calling from. So while I'm doing my thing with my headset, I just started conducting the children's chorus. I was grateful that was very easy to conduct because I'm not a conductor by any means. That is not something that I want to do. I'm not a performer, or a conductor, or anything like that. So that was fun. I got to work on a production of Silent Night in Atlanta in 2016. That was also probably a career highlight. The music is just fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the second production ever to exist after the world premiere, which is really, really exciting. That's
incredible.
Yeah. One more fun story if you want.
Yes,
in that production of Dead Man Walking in Atlanta, it was a very video intensive show. There were a lot of video projections on the set and on scrims and different curtains and things. And the video designer had lettered them as opposed to numbering, 1, 3, 5, or, whatever you want to do for your system. It was A, B, C, D. The problem was that there were, over 200 video cues. And there's not 200 letters. And even though it's the video operator's job to just hit the next button, I would always say, standby video O or whatever it is, video O, go. And when it got to video M and video N, those are very similar sounding. And she was having trouble hearing in the headset, obviously, which one I was calling. And there were multiple times where I would call in the dress rehearsals for video M, and she would think I had said N, missing the M, and would hit go twice, which obviously then destroys the moment. So then I had asked, if we can rename it to help with anything like that. And they said, yeah, what do you want to rename it? You can name it anything you want. And I said, Bob. So we had video O, video Bob, video N. But she did not miss that cue ever again.
Perfect. Lots of improvising happening. Great. Well, as we kind of wrap up, do you want to give us maybe your perspective? I'm sure you had shows canceled in the past couple of months in Houston. What has it been like for you? I mean, as part of a bigger company, but also just as an artist and as a person working in the arts, what has it been like to kind of face this recent just drop off of work?
Sure. So Houston does 2 shows in rep in the spring. So they'll do 2 shows at the exact same time. So I was supposed to stage manage Zalame, And Annie was supposed to stage manage the Magic Flute. So I had already been preparing the Salome production. It was a production from Valencia, Spain. I had translated a lot of Spanish paperwork. So hopefully we'll do the show again and not all of that has gone to waste. But because of the way that our schedule is structured, we had to cancel rather early on for shows that were actually not going to take place until mid-April into early to mid-May. It just became impossible to get either people in town or things like that. The company was very, very good with us. They were very upfront. They tried every possible option. As you mentioned, they are a very large company, so they definitely explored every possibility they could. It just became obviously too difficult, as it did for every opera company. Stage management was kept on remotely, doing some file cleanup and things like that for several weeks. I think we did about 4 weeks of that. And then I was just holding out for the summer season. The same thing. It became very evident that Des Moines Metro Opera would not be able to produce this summer either. That I've been at Des Moines Metro Opera for this would have been 10 years now. So it was a big year. I'm going to have to pause it for one summer. But I've been trying to just keep busy by reading. I started Couch to 5K. I study Spanish every day. I was brushing up on math the other day, just doing a different subject. I've never been, an artist, but I picked up adult coloring books. Just trying to keep occupied has really been it. I definitely don't want to fall into an everyday Netflix trap.
Great. Well, sounds like you've been more productive than some of us have been. So good for you on that front. Since we mentioned it just really quickly before we leave, we talked about how Houston is kind of a bigger company. What is it like working at a bigger company versus a smaller company? Because I know that Des Moines is, relatively small compared to Houston. So you've kind of at least seen a couple of different perspectives. What's that like on the stage management side?
Yeah, I've worked all over. I've done things from El Paso Opera, which has a staff of like 2, to Sarasota Opera in the winters, Michigan Opera Theater, which is quite large, the Atlanta Opera for 4.5 years. Every company is different, but depending, like you said, on their size, they have more staff or more support possibly. In Atlanta, I was responsible for doing the scheduling, the entire company every single day. But at Des Moines, which is a smaller company, they actually have a scheduling department. That's because they do so many shows all at the same time that's kind of a full-time job for someone. Yes. At the Houston Grand Opera, we also have a scheduling department. So it's the assistant director's job to actually take what they want for this schedule for the next day to the department. I stay out of scheduling almost entirely, which is a huge change for me coming from Atlanta, where I did it all. And then their scheduling department works with the spaces in the buildings. They have multiple rehearsal spaces, multiple venues. The Young Artist Program, there was an artist program they have there as well. All of that goes through their department. Here at HGO, we also have 3 assistant stage managers per show. So there's even more support in the room. Our third assistant stage manager does both shows. So they're on double duty. They're expected to know one show, obviously, at a much greater detail than the other show, but they're a great help. It frees up the first and second ASMs to focus on bigger picture things and not be worried about like checking in the chorus to make sure they're all there. It's very difficult to start a rehearsal like Aida if you have one of the ASMs out of the room. Yes. So that's a huge, huge help here.
Great. Awesome. Well, I think we are about at that time. Do you have any parting thoughts or anything to add?
No. I'm sad that I've never been able to work at Pensacola Opera, but maybe one day.
Yeah, you never know. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Cody.
Bye. And thank you all for tuning in. Please, I hope you will join us Thursday evening for our special performance streamed right here on Facebook at 7:00 p.m.